Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 1994, or at least the ones that I've seen. And I can now reveal I have seen 27 films from this particular year. I'm only going to be ranking my top 25 of those today, as is my tradition with this series. The two films which missed the cut are not actually bad films, I just can't remember them very well, so I don't think it would be fair of me to include them. Those two films are No Escape and Terminal Velocity. I have to say, I don't think 94 as a year for movies is that strong compared to some of the previous years that we've done. I certainly don't think it's as good as 93, but make your own mind up as we're going through it. Maybe a completely different looking list to your eyes than it is to mine. But before we start, a quick reminder that the top two films today will be going through to the eventual grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. But for now, let's talk about 1994, and we'll begin, as always, with the film that I consider to be my 25th and therefore least favourite film that came out from this particular year. This for me is a failed vanity project on the part of Wes Craven. I don't get this film's appeal or its popularity among Nightmare on Elm Street fans. It is so boring. I made the mistake of watching this once on a Friday night, and I was just appalled by how little of a good time I was having. If you want to see me completely tear this film apart, check out my full review. You'll find it in my Nightmare on Elm Street playlist, but I'll tell you now, I gave it half a bloody axe out of 5, and I thought I was being generous with that. I think the scene which sums this film up for me is when Freddy Krueger is dangling a child over a freeway just to try and generate some tension. But seriously, do one, Freddy. Just do one. The Three Ninjas kickback is appalling, but it's still better than New Nightmare. I'll hang my hat on that. I had the misfortune of watching this once with my very young son. He had a good time. I was just kind of sat there like... It's about 3 young kids who go around in white karate costumes. They sort of remind me of the band Hanson from the 90s. They're all between the ages of like 6 and 12, and they are absolutely capable of kicking 3 shades of shite out of any adult that comes along. I mean, they'll literally just wave their arms and go, whoop, wah, whoop, and villains will sort of fly backwards into boxes. You know, no adult in the world can take on the Three Ninjas. They're just too tough. I suppose you've got to allow this film some leeway for being a kids' film, and I think they made quite a few of these. This was quite a popular little franchise for a while, but this is the one that I remember watching with my kid, but it's not very good. And here's another one I only really know because I saw it with my kid. I think it was a couple of years ago. At least it has a good story, this idea of a rich boy struggling to make friends with normal boys, or at least it would have been if it'd been treated seriously instead of just being a mostly dumb comedy. But there's only one moment in it that really made me laugh, which is when Richie opens a McDonald's in his own house. That had me and my boy giggling away for a while, actually. But for the most part, all this film really does is just remind you of why we all got sick of Macaulay Culkin. I don't think he should have been taking on this script. If it had been a really serious drama film, I think it could have been a really good next step for him in his young career, instead of just basically being the industry milking that Home Alone persona for all they were worth for as long as they needed it. And I don't think they needed it for much longer after this film. Not my thing at all, but I have seen it a couple of times actually. It is funny in places, but I really don't like the ending. So they go on this massive road trip to try and find this woman, and then neither of them gets with said woman. No, that just doesn't work for me. It's depressing. I never got around to watching part 2, partly because it took so long to be made, and also because I just don't really care that much. This film has an intriguing setup. It's about 3 housemates who take on this new housemate, but he quickly dies of a heart attack presumably because of drug use, because he's not exactly old, this guy. Near the body, they find a suitcase with about £1 million in it. I'm not entirely sure what the exact amount is, actually, just that it's a lot of money. So they have a dilemma. Do they keep it for themselves, or do they hand it into the police? This being a movie, of course, they keep it for themselves, but it turns out that there are some gangsters looking for this money, so things get complicated. This is a film which just gets ruined by baffling character decisions. I mean, it's just stupid what the characters do in this film. First of all, why do they take the time to bury the body and cut all the teeth out and do all these disgusting things? Why not just hand the body into the police and not declare the money? If you're going to bury anything, bury the money until the whole thing has died down. Also, why don't these guys just leave Edinburgh? It would be hard for these gangster characters to track the protagonists down even today in 2021 with all the technology available. It would have been downright impossible in 1994. As soon as these characters would have left the city limits of Edinburgh, game over. I mean, it's not like these guys have got any ties in Edinburgh to keep them there. They're all single. They've all got fairly disposable jobs. I mean, just go down to London, dye your hair, get a new job, split the money, boom, Bob's your sister, movie over. As it is, they stay in the same frigging flat where the dead body and the money were found. So of course the gangsters are going to find them. And then they get an unlikely second chance when Christopher Eccleston somehow takes out the bad guy. So it's even easier for them at this point. Now they don't even have to leave Edinburgh. All they've got to do is split the money. But of course they backstab each other and do the dirty on each other. There was a time in the 90s when women went absolutely cuckoo over Hugh Grant, possibly the noughties as well. He had this nerdy demeanour that he put on in several of his movies that I guess was something like this. Well, I, I suppose it would do, wouldn't it? And for some reason, that made women go absolutely, completely wet. I just don't get it personally. In terms of Four Weddings and a Funeral, I was probably a bit too young to get this film when it came out, but even later in life, when I've tried to watch it, it's just not my scene. You know, this kind of upper class group of people who, through endless networking, end up at lots of really fancy weddings in the home counties, drinking baby sham. It's just not been my life. So definitely an overrated film in my opinion. I did watch it all the way through the one time that I did watch it. I found it mildly interesting, but not much more than that. Next up we have Highlander 3, or shall we say Highlander 1 version 2, because that's all this is. It's a retread of the first Highlander, an attempt to bring back the glory days, but it's just really dull. I mean, I actually prefer Highlander 2, as bad as that film is. At least with number 2, you can sort of use it as the basis for a drinking game. If you've got a friend round willing to watch Highlander 2 with you, you can both sit there and challenge each other to try and explain away the various plot inconsistencies as you're going through it. It's not a bad time actually, but what can you do with Highlander 3? I mean, it's just really tedious and a complete waste of time. So there's been a bad guy who was apparently buried under a mountain for the entire time that the events of Highlander 1 were going on. So now the game is afoot once more. Just it's thin, you know, it's just not worth going there, but they did. There's a channel I'm subscribed to called Video Tasties, and this guy basically shows off his old games and VHS cassette tapes, and the other week he was showcasing an old cassette tape of The River Wild, and to some extent defending the movie in the comments. Fine. I didn't personally really like this movie. The scenery is very good in it, but as a thriller, it's quite threadbare. Meryl Streep gives it her all, but I've never been the biggest fan of hers, and Kevin Bacon's villain is sort of isolated a bit. I mean, there's only two villains in this. I think one of them actually changes allegiances towards the end. So it's not exactly the wild ride that the trailer and the poster promises you. For something like this, I would much rather recommend Deliverance. If you're of a certain age, then you may have experienced the story which I'm about to tell you. So when I was a teenager in the 90s, I went to the video store this one evening with my friend Phil. My dad took us. He was going to rent a movie for us if only we could agree on something, which was difficult. We ended up in that awkward state of affairs where you can't agree on anything and you just end up ambling between the shelves, wondering if the other person is going to budge first on your recommendation. The trouble is, I was a big horror guy. He was a big comedy guy, which is problematic. I think at one point he suggested The Mask with Jim Carrey. I mean, I quickly shut that shit down, but the problem remained. What were we going to do? And in the end, we kind of met in the middle. I mean, all boys like action, ultimately, so it was always going to end up this way. So I came away from horror. He came away from comedy. We met on this film, Time Cop, and that's what we rented. And it was okay, I suppose. What more can you say about Time Cop? It's a film about a cop who travels through time, kills the bad guys, and it was made in the 90s. There ain't really much more to say about this film. It ain't Van Damme's best, put it that way. The third Beverly Hills Cop film may not have had all of the returning characters, but for my money, it's still better than number 2, which I felt was a copy of the first one, but with Bridget Nielsen thrown in there, being as annoying as Bridget Nielsen tends to be. Yeah, the third one, though, is actually alright, and I don't care whether they make a fourth one or not. It's easier for my life, actually, if I don't feel like I have to watch another one. This is a difficult one for me to rank because the novel version of The Stand is my favourite book of all time. I absolutely love it. I've read it about 4 times probably. The trouble is, it's also a very, very long novel. And as long as this adaptation is, I can't remember if it's 3 hours long or 4 hours long, it's not long enough because the book is just so damn big. So even though I sort of enjoy watching this, it's also frustrating because they've got to leave so much out. There are literally characters that don't appear in the screen adaptation at all, who are really enjoyable characters in the novel. The way to do The Stand is make it a proper TV series of like 10 episodes, 12 episodes, maybe even longer than that, which I believe they have recently done. Remember, we're talking about the 94 Stand here. Now, I tried to watch the new one about 6 months ago, but it wasn't free on any of my subscription services. I think they were asking about £25 for all the episodes. And I don't really like paying for stuff like that because I'm already subscribed to so many things. I'm subscribed to Netflix, I'm subscribed to Amazon Prime, I'm subscribed to Sky, I'm subscribed to Disney. I pay a lot of money out for a lot of stuff. So when I come across a TV show that I have to pay out extra money for, on top of all that, I usually just go, nah. Even for something like The Stand, I will say no. So I've not yet seen the new TV show. This 94 version of The Stand is sort of good, but for a really die-hard fan of the novel like me, it's also a little frustrating. So I think I've sort of gone for the middle ground today and put it in this position in the ranking, somewhere in the middle. I've got a confession to make. In my 1993 rankings video, I said I'd seen a film called Indecent Proposal. Actually, I haven't, because at the time of doing that video, I thought Indecent Proposal was this film, Disclosure. So I'm just glad that Indecent Proposal didn't actually make the main rankings for 1993. It was just an honourable mention. I would have sounded like a right Burke if I'd have started going on about Indecent Proposal as if Michael Douglas and Demi Moore were in it instead of Robert Redford, and I think it was actually also Demi Moore in Indecent Proposal. That might have been why I got confused. But anyway, in terms of Disclosure, I think it's a reasonable office thriller. There was a little bit of controversy when it came out, at least in the UK, because the poster for this depicted Demi Moore sort of rubbing herself up against Michael Douglas, against the wall of an office, and this poster was everywhere. It was on like bus stops and things, and some people didn't like it. Some fuddy-duddies were on the news one night going, "Oh, I think it's absolutely atrocious. It's just despicable," And I can remember being stood at a bus stop with a friend of mine this one time, and we were looking at this poster, and we both really wanted to watch this movie because it just looked like the most porno of porno things we'd ever seen in our lives. But the reality is very different. I don't think I ended up seeing it for another 10 years, and when I did, I mean, the sexual content is very soft, it has to be said. But the film itself, pretty good. It does keep you watching all the way through. I always enjoy watching Michael Douglas in anything. Demi Moore less so, but I'll at least say that she does look very sexy in this movie, actually. I can appreciate speed, sure, but I don't love it like some people. For some people, this is like a really beloved film from their youth. But as much as I can really respect it on a technical level, it doesn't really do anything for me emotionally. My relationship with this movie is kind of like when you really fancy a really hot woman, but for some reason you don't really find any emotional connection with her, and it leaves you kind of baffled as to why. That's me in this film. I think the biggest problem, if I'm honest, is Keanu Reeves' character. I forget his name. Now, I love Keanu Reeves as an actor. He's been in so many great things that I'm not even going to list. But this character in this film is just really wooden and annoying. And oh, Jack, that's his name, I think. I don't like him. He's just really irritating. He gets under my skin to the point where by the end of the film, I'm actually cheering on Dennis Hopper, and that's not ideal. So I respect Speed. I respect what it did for action films around about that time. It was something different to films like Die Hard, but something about it, I'll just never completely fall in love with it like some people. This is a film I thought was really great at the time that I saw it in the mid to late 90s, but the only thing is it's not that rewatchable, or at least it isn't for me. I don't think I've gone back to it once in all the time since. But when I did have that one watch that I had, I was very emotionally moved afterwards, watching the story of this little girl make friends with an assassin and then lose him, and then she's planting her little tree at the end. I mean, I could feel a couple of tears welling up behind my eyes as the credits were coming down. It's got at least one really good action sequence when all the SWAT guys try and get into Leon's apartment, and he's on this like bungee rope just taking them all out as they come in. Gary Oldman plays a pretty terrifying villain, although I'm slightly sad that Leon just didn't take this guy out in a normal way, just shooting him dead without, doing it in a way where he wouldn't die himself, sort of thing. And Natalie Portman gave a really good early indication of the terrific actress that she would go on to be. So this is a film which is drifting further and further into my memory banks the older I get, because I don't think I'm likely to really watch it again. If you're a person who's not yet had your one watch of this film, which everybody should have, everybody should watch this once, then by all means get onto it. Star Trek Generations is a weird one for me. I only watched it for the first time ever a year or two ago, but because it's got so many new characters in it, I kind of felt like I was supposed to have maybe watched the TV show first that these characters are from. The film has that sort of vibe for me, like there are things that I should know but I don't because I haven't watched the TV show. Whether that's true or not, I can't 100% say. I probably should have gone on and watched First Contact and the other films with these characters to get a better overview, but I didn't. I kind of watched Generations and then just put the whole thing to bed, didn't go back to it. At some point, I'm going to do another Star Trek marathon, and this time force myself to go all the way through the films that I've not yet watched, and then maybe do a ranking at the end. As it is, I thought Star Trek Generations was all right. I can't actually remember that much of it, even though I watched it fairly recently. Malcolm McDowell was a villain in it, unless I'm mistaken. It was all right, but I certainly remember the films with the original crew being mostly better. This movie is sort of a good example of why 94 is such a troublesome year for me. And we are this high in the ranking now, and I am still not waxing lyrical about any of these movies, really. The big selling point of The Specialist was the idea that Sylvester Stallone and Sharon Stone were going to be having this big steamy romance, but honestly, their relationship in this film does absolutely nothing for me. I don't care about these characters. The only thing that saves this movie is James Woods. He steals every scene in this film, playing this really charismatic villain. The scene where he dies, he steps on a kind of landmine type thing, and he makes this noise or does some kind of chuckle just when he realizes he's made the mistake that's going to kill him. It sort of reminds me of when Zorin smiles when he realizes he's going to fall off the Golden Gate Bridge in A View to a Kill. The other villains, apart from James Woods, though, are just absolute crap, like TV movie levels of crap. So if you take James Woods out of this film, there isn't an awful lot left. That's the sad reality of The Specialist. The last of Charles Bronson's Death Wish films, and this one's almost a return to basics after the more action-packed drug war story from Death Wish 4. This one feels very low-key for much of the running time. I think it picks up in the last half an hour. Bronson, or should I say Kersey, goes into a furniture factory and shoots a bunch of guys. I've only seen it the once, it was a while ago, but this Christmas my wife has agreed to slip under the tree a complete collection of Death Wish on Blu-ray. So in the new year, I'm going to catch up with all these films and probably do a franchise ranking for Death Wish. That'll be a lot of fun because all 5 of these films, in my opinion, are quite closely matched. I'm very sketchy on this one as well. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is about 2 teenage girls who possibly live in New Zealand. This might be a period piece as well, might be. One of the girls is definitely Kate Winslet. I can't remember at all who the other girl is, but they form some kind of really unhealthy friendship which sort of isolates them from their family and their peers at school. And towards the end of the film, I think they kill somebody for a good reason. I'm sure it is. I can't remember who they kill though, or why. But the ending's quite sad because I think in order to avoid long prison sentences, it's a condition of the court that they're not allowed to see each other forever. It's really weird, but yeah, my memory's not great on it, but I do remember it's a very, very solid drama and well worth a place in the top 10 today. For a time after he did Under Siege, Steven Seagal movies were actually still shown in cinemas, and I believe this was one of them. It's got some naff ecological messaging in it, but the action's not bad. There's one really vicious moment where Seagal grabs this guy and shoves his face into some helicopter rotor blades. It's really vicious. The main villain is a lot of fun as well. It's played by Michael Caine. There's a great scene where Caine, because he's playing like an oil boss, he does this commercial where he has to stand on this really snowy film set and stroke some reindeer, and he's like, "We here at HB Oil really care about the environment." And then as soon as the camera cuts, he's like, "Fuck, these animals stink, get them away from here." It's just a great scene. I haven't seen this film in quite some time, and talking about it now has really made me want to watch it again. How many times do I say that in a typical ranking video? This is a Wesley Snipes action film about a cop whose latest investigation takes him to some kind of parachuting tournament. I'm not that fond of the leading lady in this. I think her name is Natasha Kaczynski or something like that. She was also in Hard Target. She just doesn't really do it for me. I do like the villains in this, though. They're led by Gary Busey, who's in top form. He's got a team of 4 or 5 parachuting experts who break into government buildings. This is a pretty decent film. An evening spent watching this is not wasted at all. I'm not going to say it. Okay, I will do. I've not seen this one in a long time, and I'd really like to now. This is my personal favourite of the 2 Harrison Ford-fronted Jack Ryan films. I've not actually seen any Jack Ryan films that don't star Harrison Ford. I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head how many of them there are. I'm still disappointed to this day, actually, that Ford gave up the role. It's not like any of the younger actors who came in to do later ones would be more successful than him at the box office, unless he just didn't want to do them anymore. This film is based on a novel, as all Jack Ryan films are, I imagine. The novel has a very different villain to the film, although both of those villains are very good. There's a lot of suspense in this, a lot of political intrigue. There's at least one great action sequence involving a government motorcade that gets attacked in the middle of a Colombian high street. I saw this at the cinema with my dad, and it was probably one of my favourite cinema trips of that era. We both really enjoyed the film that night. So this one definitely has my seal of approval. Of course it would. We're now into the top 5. I'll say straight away, I don't have the best memory of this one, but I do remember that it was excellent and bloody scary. I was only about 13 when I watched it, so I might have a different experience now. But if you like The Thing, then I could easily imagine you'd enjoy this, because it's sort of a similar setup. I'm not sure if it's an original film. I'm sure it's a remake of like a 50s film or a 60s film. There might even be more than 2 films of this. I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to have to go on Wikipedia after I've done this recording. But they say that the 1990s was not very good for horror. To some extent, they are correct. But there are still quite a few hidden gems around from this kind of time period. Body Snatchers is one of them, and it's highly recommended. So this is the unlucky film today, but it is a wonderful film. I mean, if I was going to review this, 5 out of 5 all day long. I think the reason why it's been beaten by 2 of the films is that it's not as rewatchable as the films we're going to be talking about any moment now. But The Shawshank Redemption it's so emotional. It's got so many highs and lows. It's absolutely gripping. The first time you watch it, you just cannot take your eyes off it. It's got a career performance from Morgan Freeman. The other guy, who's not as well known in general cinema, I think his name's Tim Robbins or something Robbins. I might have got that completely wrong. He gives a wonderful performance as well. Very satisfying ending. It's probably the best prison movie ever made. Or would that be Lock Up with Sylvester Stallone? No, probably The Shawshank Redemption, I'm reckoning. So if you've not seen this, seriously, you've got to watch it. I can't imagine anybody not liking this film. It doesn't matter what genre you're into. Shawshank Redemption is literally for everybody. I guess it could be a little bit downbeat and depressing for some, but not wanting to give any spoilers away, but it's well worth plodding through the dark times in this story. That's all I'm saying. So that's it for the films that haven't made it through to the grand final. It's time now to check out the films which will be going through to the grand final, starting with the film which is second in today's ranking. It's hard for me to talk about True Lies these days without mentioning that it still doesn't have a bloody Blu-ray. So come on, Mr. Cameron, sort out a Blu-ray for this. And while you're at it, do one for The Abyss as well. True Lies, though, is almost certainly one of the best action films from the 1990s. I mean, this was Schwarzenegger in the very last stages of his pomp, really. He did a Razor after this, and then after that I think he went a bit off the boil. Jamie Lee Curtis in this film plays one of my favourite characters that she's done outside of horror. It's quite a comedic film, thanks to the genius talents of Bill Paxton in a very amusing sort of side role that he does. But this film will mostly be remembered for its incredible action, especially the finale. I mean, that stuff with the fighter jet and the helicopter absolutely blew me away when me and my dad first rented this. So True Lies will be going through to the final. It's time to find out which other film will be joining it. Let's see what is my favourite film that came out in '94. This might come as a bit of a surprise to you if you just happen to see my recent Quentin Tarantino rankings video that I did, because Pulp Fiction only came 5th out of 9th. Now, this isn't me trying to make up for that. I haven't rewatched the film since I did my Tarantino rankings, so it's not like I've reappraised it. Okay, 2 things. Firstly, I like all of Quentin Tarantino's movies, so whether I put a film first in a ranking of his or 9th, I like the film either way. You know, I think I'll put Reservoir Dogs bottom of my Tarantino ranking, I still like Reservoir Dogs. Secondly, like I said earlier, I don't think the general standard of movies in '94 was all that hot. You can only beat what's put in front of you, and if Pulp Fiction just happens to be the best film from this particular year, then fine. I don't think it's got any chance of winning the eventual grand final of 100 films. Little spoiler there, I just don't see that. I don't think it'll even come close. I certainly don't think it would have beaten Carlito's Way from '93. You know, often with the rankings in this series, it is a little bit random sometimes. There'll be films that I absolutely love that come fourth in any one given year and therefore don't qualify for the final. And sometimes there'll be quite a weak year where a film will sneak into second spot that, yeah, I like, but it's not like an amazing film. And I think to myself, wow, that one really took advantage of a weak field. So possibly this is a little bit of a weak field. I don't know, but having said that, look, Pulp Fiction is still a pretty amazing film. It is. Seen it many, many times. It never fails to entertain me. True Lies is also a fantastic action film. That's the other film that's gone through today. So I'm not going to dwell on it too much. We'll see ultimately what happens in that grand final. But there you have it. That was my ranking for 1994. There is only one more question left to ask. I've got 4 films written down today. One of them is Clerks. I think it's a kind of comedy film set in a record store or something. I've always heard that it's pretty good. I'm not desperate to see it or anything, but who knows, maybe one day. Now, the other 3 films that I've written down, they are films that I really do want to see. One of them is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Another one is Interview with a Vampire. As the Hammer fan that I am, I'm quite surprised actually that I haven't made more of an effort to see some of these more modern takes on the Universal monsters. I need to get on with it at some point. And the other film I've written down, yeah, I'd love to see this one as well, Wyatt Earp. Kevin Costner Western. I do like a good Western. I've still not seen Tombstone that came out the year before Wyatt Earp as well. So 2 really big Westerns from the 90s I've still not got around to seeing. There's so much out there that I'd like to see and I've just never gotten around to it. So maybe for the future. Right, that's the end of my 1994 rankings. I'll be back soon with a ranking for 95. Until next time, cheerio.